Magda is the most colorful, outgoing, strong, independent woman that I know.
When we first met, we were actually introduced. We were set up, and neither of us really took a shine to the other person. And I think that was actually also a great start, because it meant we started with very low expectations of each other.
If you want to be an entrepreneur in South Africa, you first of all have to have a pot of savings. You have to be prepared to work triply hard, much harder than you have ever worked in your life. You have to be very confident in your idea. But you've got to be prepared for at least 3 to 5 years of really tough time before you hit the sweet spot. And most people give up much sooner than that.
Something that I can't explain.
My name is Magda Wierzicka, and I'm a chief executive of a company called Signia. And what we do is we manage money, savings, on behalf of South Africans. And we manage savings in pension funds, and we also offer unit trusts to individual investors. So you can invest with Signia in a variety of different ways. We offer our savings products at the lowest possible cost available in South Africa to an investor. And that really is our business strategy. It's to make savings easy, accessible, and as cheap as we possibly can make them, so that people can maximize the amount of savings they have when they retire. I was born in Poland in the middle of communist era. And you know, those first 10 years of my youth, I remember as very happy time. And by 1980s, early 80s, all the Eastern European countries started running out of money, and that meant that the countries started running out of food. And that was a time when about 3 million Eastern Europeans literally left Eastern Europe illegally, under the cover of darkness. And my parents, 3 children, grandmother, we all left carrying suitcases, and we crossed the border illegally into Austria, and we landed up in a refugee camp. Anyway, my parents were medical doctors, and they were hired by the military hospital in Pretoria and shipped to South Africa. They were given very restricted permission to work in government hospitals on very low salaries. And so I arrived in South Africa at the age of 13.
Right from school days when she couldn't speak English, to university days where she was only able to go to university on a bursary and get by on using her food budget to dress herself. She's always known that she has to work harder than everyone else. One of the critical moments in our marriage was when we first started working together. We'd both come from different organizations, that we both found ourselves unemployed at the same time and decided to start something without really knowing what it was. Within a week or two, we realized that we were at risk of banging heads together, that there could only be one leader in a successful business. And I think that was a very crucial decision, because if we were to compete with each other in the business, something would have given, and probably would have been the marriage.
I'm married to another actuary. We've been married for over 20 years now, and we have 2 sons. One is 17 and one is 19. When I had my kids in late 1990s, with my first child, my maternity leave lasted exactly 5 days, because my CEO was immediately on the line while I was in the maternity ward, phoning me saying, clients are calling, we don't know what to do, you must come back. So I literally packed up my child in a basket and we came to work. With the second child, I didn't even bother with maternity leave. I literally had an induction on a Friday evening, and I was back in the office on Monday morning.
Whenever I need something, whether it's help with my homework or Just some advice on life in a situation that I'm struggling with. She always is willing to put down her work and just help me through it.
And I decided to start my own business at the age of 32. And those were very stressful times, because what I discovered, you've got this exuberance of youth and you think you can achieve anything. But actually, to run your own business, you need to have the basics of almost everything, of finance, of a little bit of legal, of administrations, of operations, of IT. And I had some of the knowledge, but not all of the knowledge. And it was that realization that led me to make this formative or very important decision, which was I was approached by Mzi Kumalo, and Mzi has recently purchased a company called African Harvest, and it also was a failing business. And he persuaded me to take over running African Harvest on his behalf. And I remember when I discovered all the flaws, phoning Mzi and saying, Mzi, what the heck? And Mzi saying, Magda, it's not that I didn't tell you the truth, it's just that you really didn't ask the right questions. A few years into that, Mzi phoned me and said, Magda, I want to sell because, I've made a lot of money out of this business, so I want to sell. And so we sold African Harvest, and 6 of us took out a few licenses and a couple of clients, and we started what is Signia today. So this is part of our investment team because the other part sits all the way downstairs. Indeed, and some projects that they need to work on and provide me with feedback on, so that we can actually then amalgamate it into a kind of team decision making around what we are going to do with investments. Control of capital still resides by and large in white hands, and that needs to change. I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that we can continue on the same path as we have continued on. In terms of myself, and yes, that I have seen some labels on Twitter, from shady sources calling me white monopoly capital. I'm hoping that my story is actually the opposite of that. I wasn't born into money. So the listing on the JSE was quite a critical moment in the life cycle of Signia. We're embarking on a new chapter of this book. It's a book I'm going to write one day when I retire, but this is really the opening chapter right there. And let's look forward to 9 o'clock and see what happens. And the nice thing about the listing, because we were still going through a bit of a strong economy and a lot of foreign investors in South Africa, we were 21 times oversubscribed. So there was huge hype around Signia listing on the JSE, probably too much hype. Because you list, but if people overvalue your company, you then have to deliver to these really unreasonable expectations. And I can control everything about this business other than the share price. So one of our innovations of last year was to launch a Signia Fourth Industrial Revolution Fund. And the next product that we're looking at is to launch a fund which invests in Bitcoin, which is virtual currency. It's cryptocurrency or virtual currency. That will be, I'm quite sure, quite a fight with the regulators, Reserve Bank, the JSE, as people wrap their minds around it. But the vehicle is taxed, it is regulated, it is protected, so investors are protected. It's not just, Wild West. Bank of Japan, for instance, legalized Bitcoin as legal tender. But in the world of internet, you can use Bitcoin to pay for things already. So you can buy things if you have Bitcoin, but you first need to buy Bitcoin. But the price is volatile, and it all responds to different, in places where it's unregulated, such as South Africa, you can go to an unregulated exchange, buy Bitcoin, and then spend it overseas with no control of what you're spending it on. so the Reserve Bank actually has no clue what you're doing with the money. Or you can invest in Bitcoin and hold it as an investment, and it appreciates in value, and then you spend it, and again, you don't get taxed on the gains. So, the sooner we move to more regulation in the space, the better, which is why we want to launch a regulated product in the Bitcoin space, which will be easy. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to persuade the regulators that they should allow us to list the product on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And we in very early stages of engagement with them, but I think they're receptive so far.
Being married to Magda is a very interesting experience. I mean, there's never a dull moment.
And then, of course, now we find ourselves in this kind of politically uninteresting times, which, unfortunately, politics and economics have merged. So you actually cannot talk about one without talking about the other. And that has thrown us into this space of being an activist company, where we look at what's happening in South Africa and we look at the level of corruption in the public service and the private sector equally. While researching a company, I came across, obviously in the media I read a lot about social grants and CPS as distributor of social grants. And then I became interested in what this company was all about, and I discovered that it was actually owned by a company called Net1. And I started reading up. I mean, it really didn't take a lot of research to suddenly discover that Net1 is there exploiting the poorest strata of society. So literally I discovered a company whose business model on the surface was to pay social grants. But in reality, their sole objective was to use that distribution mechanism to start selling funeral insurance and airtime and electricity and microloans at astronomical interest rates, which they called fees, to the poorest of the poor. And that's what I started writing about in the media. And that led to a huge amount of kind of activist attention around Signia. And in fact, it led to changes. It led to the change of the board of directors at Net1. It led to the firing of the CEO. And hopefully it will lead to changes in the business practices of that business. But almost right from there, that threw us very, very strongly into this world of activism and fighting for the consumers, which again is in line with our core philosophy. It's just took a slightly different path. My management team has to take much greater responsibility for everything that goes on at Signia. And what they've done behind my back, without my knowledge, they formed this chaos room and a chaos committee. And that's where they discuss all of their problems. So the one thing about Signia is that it's a great collaboration. I truly believe that the only way to build a truly successful company is if you can make people work as a team. And these are not empty words. When we hire people, however talented they are, and when we pick up that they are motivated by building their own empires, we dismiss them. Because the idea is that when there's a problem in the company, 10 people put up their hands and help each other. And that takes a particular type of people. It's not everybody who's going to work in that kind of environment.
Have you all heard about the Bitcoin fund yet? Briefly. Okay. All right. So we're quite keen to see if we can't launch something in the Bitcoin space. There's a couple of approvals that will first have to happen. So I think Ben has already sent something into the JSE on the structure that we're quite keen for. Because obviously, if they're not going to list it, then we can't list it here. It'll have to be approved by the SARB, and Mike has already drawn up the reasons why it's a good idea for us to have this fund. But we're looking at that new gold structure. So it doesn't fall into the ETF kind of structure. It doesn't fall into an investment trust because investment trusts have to track securities and Bitcoin is not security. So we're looking at that structure that's been put around gold as an ETF. Yeah. So that's the kind of structure we're looking at now. And then what we're quite keen to do is see if we can't list that outside of South Africa.
What you see is what you get. But from the other side of the looking glass is I get to see the normal person as well. So the balance for me between the two is something that she does really well.
An account has been set up.
No way.
You know, I had a very unpleasant incident, and I'm sure these things will surface again. And that is, you know, there were Twitter accounts that were set up. And those Twitter accounts had very creatively photoshopped shots of me as a stripper with a whole lot of captions of how to make money stripping, how to make billions stripping. I was just hoping they give me a good body, but such a big bust. Someone emailed this to me and said, should we laugh and cry? Someone else emailed and said, we should throw money. You know, stepping into these corruption type discussions and activist type roles, the negative side of that is your personal safety and security. So unfortunately now you do receive death threats and you do receive threats. And you can't take them lightly. You can take them lightly in terms of the risks you take for yourself, but you certainly can't take those risks on behalf of your children or your family. So unfortunately it does mean that I now have security, which is a novel concept for me. You know, I've never needed or felt the need to have security. Now I have security. But in the meantime, you know, it has obviously had an impact on my children. It has had an impact on my husband, who keeps saying to me, why do you seek these things out? Wouldn't it be easier not to?
The things that Magda's been involved with recently have obviously meant a big change for us as a family.
And if they really think that that's just a few pictures are going to be the only thing that are going to hold her down, they are wrong.
I think success looks different to different people depending on what lens you're looking through. So to me, success is, you know, being able to, on your deathbed, look back at your life, have no regrets, and be able to say, I made a difference. Even if it's just a difference in the lives of a handful of people. I mean, not everybody can make, you know, global difference. Not everybody can make a difference to society, but I want to be able to, on my deathbed, look back and say, it wasn't all about money. If I lose it all tomorrow, I lose it all tomorrow. It's irrelevant. What's relevant is that when I'm dying, I look back and I say, I led a meaningful, productive life and I made a difference. And hopefully there's some people who come to my funeral as a consequence of that. I do have a story, and it's a story that I will tell you tonight. I know that a lot of you are here because you're not so much interested in my story, but you are more interested in my political views. And we'll get to those at the end of it. So I just want to do both stories justice. I'm really invited here to talk about entrepreneurship and my journey through this kind of landscape of starting businesses. Some succeeded, some did not. But you know what I realized is that actually setting up a business is very stressful, and you know, being 32 years old was probably too young. You know, I still had big gaps in my knowledge. You know, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who said to me, oh, do I want to go to lunch? And I said, absolutely, I'll go to lunch. I went to lots of lunches then. And I went to this lunch in Winehouse in Newlands. Instead of having lunch with Ethan, there was a man sitting in the booth, and that was a man by the name of Mzi Kumalo. And Mzi was one of the main commanders of Umkhonto we Sizwe. He spent 13 years on Robben Island with Mandela. So I know stories about Mandela which no one should know. You know, and he taught me a lot of lessons, a lot more lessons than, you know, I've learned through anything else that I've done in my life. I've always said, you know, it took a black man to give a young white woman a chance in the financial services industry in South Africa, and I've never forgotten that. My relationship with my children will start in their teenage years. That's when I will be the best mother I possibly can. And you know, on a balance of timelines, first 15 years versus potentially another 40 years, I chose 40 years. And that is actually what has motivated me. I've never felt guilty about it. I've been very lucky to be married to the right man who accepted me for what I am and also accepted his role in the marriage and was willing to step up.
And so we quite early on set out what the key roles were. And although, we were both working, I never worked quite as hard as Magda, but no one does. The sort of thing that would happen is that, I would always make sure I was home at 6 o'clock in the evening so that she could carry on working if she had to without having to think about whether she needed to be home or not. And we found roles that dovetailed with each other.
So it became a partnership which involved, splitting the roles and not feeling guilty about the fact that I wasn't necessarily fulfilling, the cupcake
traditional mother role.
Yeah, the traditional mother role. And Simon not feeling weakened by the fact that he actually was there for the boys when they were growing up a lot more than I was. But it just became a partnership which made sense. But those initial few years of working together were tough. I mean, it's not for the faint-hearted.
No, it's certainly not something I would ever recommend that a couple enters into lightly. And I think we've been blessed at how well we've managed to make it work.
How we navigated it. But certainly, I think, given the choice, I don't think we would have done it again.
No, knowing what you know now.
Yeah, no. No, now I think it's because it's important that people have, you have a different personality at work and you have a different personality at home. And you want
space for that.
Yes, and you want to have that space. Whereas when you work together, you don't have the space to be different people. And you also tend to take your work into the home. So the work conversation never stops. It just carries on. Which means that you've got much less scope for relaxing and just, talking about random things because you tend to default back to conversations about work issues.
We never had those sort of evenings where you come home and say, honey, how was your day? How was your day?
Yeah,
because we knew exactly what the day was like and in fact, we continued to discuss the issues that arose during the day.
So it definitely was a shift. But we've managed to make it work. It's been many years now and it works, like a charm. But I think, those initial years of adjusting were quite tough. And one way we coped at African Harvest was that you sat on a different floor to me. Yeah. So we wouldn't see each other during the day.
It was a very deliberate...
Yes, we made a deliberate decision to split office space so that we wouldn't bump into each other. So hopefully in 5 years' time, the conversations we are having are not about corruption in South Africa and KPMG and the latest scandal, but we're having some real conversations about a thriving economy, about a better education system, about growing businesses, about wealthier South Africans. So hopefully that's where we are in 5 years' time, exactly the same spot, just having different conversations, much more meaningful conversations than what we're having now.
The most admirable thing about Magda to me is the fact that she wants to make a change in people's lives. She doesn't speak out the way that she does or do the things she does because she wants to be in the spotlight. For her, it's about making a change and making sure that she makes a difference in people's lives.